morning. Good to have you with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. The world wakes up this morning asking the question, what's next? ISIS is now threatening to hit the United States right at its heart in Washington, D.C. How do we take the threat? It has been a horrific weekend to watch this carnage unfold in front of the world's eyes. And at the G8 summit, or the G20 summit, which is taking place in Turkey, it is, of course, the focal point of conversation. The president responding to what happened on Friday night.
The skies have been darkened by the horrific attacks that took place in Paris, as was true with the terrible attacks that took place in Ankara. The killing of innocent people based on a twisted ideology is an attack not just on France, not just on Turkey, but it's an attack on the civilized world.
And of course, that is the big question. What do we do next? The ominous backdrop to all of this is a comment that President Obama made just previous to the Paris attack on Friday night.
I don't think they're gaining strength. What is true is that from the start, our goal has been first to contain, and we have contained them. They have not gained ground in Iraq, and in Syria, they'll come in, they'll leave, but you don't see the systematic march by ISIL across the terrain.
It's not about territory at this point. It's about targets. And the targets are now global. So what do? This is going to break out a big conversation in the United States. Number one, our strategy, what is it? Number two, how many resources do we put forth? Will this engage the entire globe to fight these jihadists? And also, how do you end it? How do you win it? How do you do this? No one really has good answers, but the fearmongers are out and about. This is Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina on the Senate Intelligence Committee.
We've got to have a strategy. We don't have a strategy in Syria as it relates to ISIL. The president talked the other morning about ISIL was contained. America learned within 24 hours it's not contained. It's rampant everywhere in the world that they intend to carry out these horrific acts. It just so happens the United States is a target, but Paris was easier. And if we don't get a strategy, tactics don't make a strategy. So these pinpricks that we've had as far as a tactical effort in Syria really is not a strategy.
Well, it seems to me that a strategy is going to be needed globally. And what is the silver lining here, if there is one, with all this carnage laying in front of the folks across this globe? Well, the Civil War was started after Fort Sumter was fired on. It motivated people. We, of course, as a country, were motivated after being hit by Pearl Harbor. We, of course, as a country, were motivated to do something after being hit on 9/11. Whether the response was correct or not is always going to be debated. And that, of course, was a focal point of the debate on Saturday night in Des Moines, Iowa, with the Democrats. So this conversation is going to go on for generations. Is this the wake-up call for the French? Will they be in it for the long haul? Will other countries come on board? What is the economic impact to all of this? And, of course, there's no better place to talk about it than at the G20 summit. And that's exactly where President Obama and Vladimir Putin gathered for some quick diplomacy. The Russians could be our best friends in all of this. The big division is that they want to prop up Assad. We do not. But the fact is they're a target. We're a target. So what do? It is going to take leadership at a global level like we've never seen before. Well, at home, we must be protected, and the fearmongers are out and about. Just listen to Senator Lindsey Graham.
There is a 9/11 coming, and it's coming from Syria if we don't disrupt their operations inside of Syria. I'm trying to protect America from another 9/11, and without American boots on the ground in Syria and Iraq, we're going to get here at home. And if you don't understand that, you're not ready to be commander-in-chief, in my view.
Joining us now on Ed Schultz News and Commentary is Dean Obeidallah. He is a columnist for the Daily Beast and also a radio host on SiriusXM of the Dean Obeidallah Show. Dean, good to have you back with us.
Great to be on, Ed. Nice to chat with you again.
We can't put into words the carnage that unfolded on Friday night, but of course the political football has already started to be kicked back and forth on how we identify it. I want your take on this, your unvarnished feeling on exactly how this should be viewed by everyone.
Well, it's a horrific terrorist attack. I mean, it was something that I don't think anyone could have expected, and it's sort of the worst nightmares come true that civilians were slaughtered by crazed terrorists while doing nothing but enjoying their lives at a restaurant, at a sporting match, at a movie theater. And from my point of view, of course, being Muslim, it's even worse because not only is there tragedy, but now we have more people seeing Islam defined through the lens of what ISIS wants to define it as. ISIS has a political agenda, and their goal is to create a war, a religious war between the West and Islam. That's their dream. And this, unfortunately, in the minds of some, will take us closer to that, because some will view all Muslims as bad, or as at least a threat, and that we need to kill or detain or surveil at least all Muslims, including Muslim Americans, simply because of their faith. And that's the narrative ISIS wants. It really must be, it's not Islam versus the West, it's all of us versus ISIS. And that's the way it must be. It has to be. The number one victim of ISIS are Muslims. I've written about it for the Daily Beast numerous times. I have a new article up today about that very thing, talking about, through the UN and State Department reports, overwhelmingly the victims of ISIS are Muslims. They behead Muslims. They behead those who don't agree with ISIS. They've killed Sunni imams, Shia imams. They don't care. The victims in Paris, now we're hearing the names, and numerous ones are Arabs and Muslims. They do not care. ISIS is not about Islam. It truly is about an agenda.
Well, the conservatives in this country, especially the politicians, are quick to label them as radical Islamic terrorists. Mm-hmm. And they get infuriated with Democrats when that term isn't used. Your reaction to that?
I mean, the idea of, I hate to get into the word fight because I think it distracts us from the reality of this. Yeah. What President Obama is saying, we're not going to call it radical Islam, was for a real reason. And I talked to Ben Rhodes about it, the Deputy National Security Advisor. It's to be accurate. That's what they're being. That's all they want to be, is accurate in this fight. And that, because radical Islam gives a sense that ISIS really are some strain of Islam, just like there'd be different strains of Christianity. It'd been Protestants, Episcopalians. Oh, and there's a strain of radical Islam. It's not. ISIS has its own interpretation of not just Islam. It's actually a sheer fabrication, which is the way numerous religious scholars and imams I've spoken to about it. And the greatest point I can give to people is that if ISIS is really following some true Islam, then why are they fighting Al-Qaeda? Why are they killing each other? They're literally beheading each other on the killing fields of Syria. If they were both about some true Islam, some radical Islam, they'd be in cahoots with each other. Instead, they're at odds because it's a political agenda. So ISIS uses religion.
Why isn't the Muslim world totally unified to defeat ISIS?
Why are they, or why are they? Or
why are they not totally unified to and resourcing it to the max to defeat ISIS? I think that's one of the big frustrations of folks in our country. Your thoughts?
I agree, and I think that this might be more of a wake-up call. In the Muslim world, there have been numerous Arab nations, Muslim nations in the coalition bombing. Obviously, Jordan's pilot was burned to death on TV thanks to ISIS and their barbaric actions for bombing targets of ISIS. So we've seen Jordan, you've seen the Gulf states involved, you've seen Saudi involved. Can they step it up? Do they want to commit boots on the ground to fight ISIS? Yes, I wish they would do that. There's nothing I can do about internally their politics and why they're not. It's the reality is, I just spoke to an ambassador just last week before this attack, who's from the Middle East, who spoke about this exact issue, why some Arab countries and the country she represents is stepped up, but why others aren't. And also the idea that some in Qatar, some in Saudi are still funding ISIS. Not the governments, don't get me wrong, but they're still giving money to ISIS to support ISIS. And that those allies, those countries of ours that are allies, must crack down on their own citizens who are supporting ISIS. The same way they crack down on people who dissent against government policies, which is wrong, but that's what they do. Well, then they should be able to stop these people in their own country from giving money to ISIS the same way. And again, it's not the governments of Qatar. They're not complicit with it, or Saudi, at least not from this person's point of view. But they have the wherewithal to at least crack down on some of this and make it clear that our citizens cannot be supporting ISIS.
Dean, if this isn't a wake-up call, what's it going to take? I mean, obviously, we responded after 9/11. We responded after Pearl Harbor. I mean, there are historical markers that have taken place through time where countries do completely change attitudes and move forward to get something done. Are we at that point right now?
I think within the United States, yes. I'm hoping within the Muslim world you see more animation for them to engage in it. From the point of view of Arab and Muslim leaders, they'll say we're completely engaged. We're giving fighter jets. We're bombing. They have not committed troops on the ground in large numbers, and that would be the next visible step. And that would, I think, make a clear indication to Americans in the world that ISIS is something we agree mutually is a scourge and must be eliminated. I hope that they do commit a huge number of troops on the ground and really fight ISIS there. ISIS is not just in Syria and Iraq anymore. People have to also remember this. It's spread now, little pockets of it. I mean, you have some in Libya, but you have small pockets around the world, little cells. Those are much harder to fight. Those are going to have to be not boots on the ground. That's going to be intelligence gathering within each country and cracking it down. But their actual troop base, Syria and Iraq and Libya as well, that can be combated with troops on the ground.
Okay. You write in the Daily Beast that as a Muslim you go through certain steps of grief. I'd like you to expound on that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, the reality is when you hear about any kind of attack in America, and usually it's school shootings or mass shootings, and we don't know the identity of the assailant, I can tell you, with few exceptions, Muslims around the country hope the person who's done this horrible act is not Muslim. That's the first thing. The same thing happened when we saw the first original news from Paris. It was like 15 people or 18 people killed. It sounded like a typical mass shooting we have in America at that point. But still, we wish there were not Muslims involved. As it becomes clear in this case that it was Muslims, we go from this kind of actually, many of us, to depression. That's really where myself and many in my community were on Friday. The idea of despondency, that you're upset, the loss of life, and worst of all, this loss of life has been perpetrated by people using your faith. The faith that you believe in that brings you closer to God. These people are using it to bring them closer to their political agenda and destroying our faith. Then it goes to a sense of, little by little, outrage, I would say, and fear combined together. The fear being a backlash against our community. What will happen now? Will there be a spike in hate crimes against Muslim Americans or Muslims in France and Western countries? Will there be more discrimination? Will there be more surveillance of us here in America? Will we lose our civil liberties? Because polls show, even before this, about a majority of Americans had no problem with us losing our civil liberties because of our religion and allowing whole-scale surveillance. To finally now where our community is, and it's anger and it's outrage and it's palpable. We've had this before, but this is really the most broad I've seen it in recent times because of just the carnage involved. And it's anger towards ISIS. It's, really, people who have never heard curse, Muslims I've never heard curse in my life, have been cursing in emails and text messages and in conversations how angry they are at ISIS. And my other fear is that ISIS uses this for its other agenda, which is to recruit Muslims in the West, because they hope there's going to be a backlash against Muslims in the U.S. and the Western countries, because they could say, look, you're really not wanted there. They hate you because you're a faith. Come join us. Either come to the caliphate that they call the caliphate, and it's not a caliphate, it's not sanctioned by faith at all, but come join us or carry out some horrible act in your own country.
Okay.
So ISIS wants to see a backlash against Muslims. So, this is the roller coaster of emotion that myself and many in my community go through, and the frustration to make it clear to our fellow Americans that ISIS does not speak for Islam. We're not part of it. I'm not the exception because I'm the good guy. They're the exception. They're not part of my faith. Just like when some Christian blows up an abortion clinic or kills Dr. Tiller, I don't think that's Christianity. I know that's the exception.
No,
we don't have that yet.
Yeah, I get that for sure. I think Americans do as well. I just feel like we're going into a new phase, a new effort globally against these jihadists. Dean Obeidallah, good to have you with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. You bet we'll do it again. What is the global strategy? When we come back, Admiral Joe Sestak, who spent 30 years in military intelligence, will give his insights on all of this and more reaction on what are we going to do when it comes to Syrian refugees to the United States. Stay with us. This is Ed Schultz News and Commentary.
Hey folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind, chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, wegoted.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.biogreenclean and order today.
It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems.
Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns.
It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor.
They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
Subscribe to the Ed Schultz podcast today. Simply log on to iTunes, search for Ed Schultz, and click the subscribe button to have the show delivered to your preferred listening device daily, free of charge. Rate and review the podcast and tell us how we're doing. More details at WeGotEd.com.
Good to have you back with us on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. The world asking what's next and how. Well, the French have already responded with increased airstrikes on the Islamic State. But they also may go the route of NATO. They may initiate the NATO defense clause, which would require all 28 countries to respond to what has happened and what they suggest and what involvement they're going to have moving forward to fight ISIS. For more on that, let's turn to Joe Sestak, former admiral, spent 30 years in military intelligence. He's running for Senate in Pennsylvania. Joe, good to have you back with us.
Good to be with you, Ed. Thank you.
What are the options the French have right now other than militarily getting involved and moving forward? I mean, I view this as their 9/11. It's the worst attack on French soil since World War II. It is clearly historic. What about it?
Well, I think that there is this possibility that they may request, as we did, that NATO come behind it because it has been an act of war against France. But I think overarching of this, Ed, is that the United States must take the lead in recognizing that we have to have a different strategy than what we're doing today against ISIS. By and large, we've looked at ISIS as a terrorist organization. It is much more than that. It is a wannabe, very dangerous, ideological-driven state. I mean, it has control of a population that's equivalent to Norway's. It has a size that it controls that's equivalent to Belgium. It has $2 billion in assets and gets $600 million every year in revenues. And now it has a foreign policy, which is really a state-sponsored terrorism, just like Libya did on Gaddafi. If we don't look at it in that way, militarily, we will be doing the wrong thing. Like, why 50 special forces? What's the metrics for why that's the right answer? So we have to change how we look at this with our strategy overarching in conjunction with France and others in a grand coalition.
It's not a matter of territory as I see it, Joe. It's a matter of targets. And they have the ability to hit targets globally. They're now threatening Washington, D.C. The president said before the attack on Friday that ISIS is contained. Of course, the attack proves otherwise, I think. So your conversation of a different and broader strategy clearly, I think, is the common sense of all of this. But moving forward, and I see the president meeting with Vladimir Putin, couldn't the Russians be our best ally in all of this?
Without a question. And
even though they want Assad and we do not, there still is ISIS there that needs to be defeated. So how does this play?
Ed, you hit it on the spot. And you and I talked about Putin before, that his being there can be an asset to us. We need, as I said, first and foremost, this grand coalition where the adversary of ours may be, in a coalition of convenience, our allies. So this includes Iran, this includes Russia, Saudi Arabia, that we want to make sure that they, like us, take down ISIS. So politically, diplomatically, we have to bring about this grand coalition. Now, that may mean in the discussion that we have to live with Assad a lot longer than we would like. But guess what? He is not directly threatening us. And right now, it's ISIS that threatens us with its global reach. But second, Ed, you had a very important point about targets. Right now, our targets have been with our air power, by and large, on the tactical battlefield. If we treat ISIS like a state that means we should be doing what the French did today. We gave them the intelligence to go after the power structures that undergird a state, the headquarters of their government, which we haven't been doing even though we've identified them. And it means the oil fields in northeast Syria from where they get much of their $600 million annually. Our strikes, our air power strikes, need to be focused on what undergirds a state, not just on the tactical battlefield.
If this isn't a 9/11 wake-up call to the Muslim world that recognizes Islam for what they are and who they are, what is that moment?
Well, I strongly believe, first and foremost, people bring who they are into a religion. So this isn't the religion. This is people who have brought their own violence into Islam, in my belief. So it's these terrorists that are these violent people that are doing it. Number two, yes, it's a wake-up call to them. I mean, even Saudi Arabia, Sunni, is opposed to ISIS, which is Sunni, and it basically helped create. And this is why people are waking up there. Egypt, where the beheading happened. Libya, where damage is being done. And so this is a moment where the diplomatic skills of John Kerry, of the United States of America, are most needed to have Russia, have Iran, which has lost 3,000 of its soldiers down there, and can actually be brought in a coalition of the willing at this moment. Because this is not for us to have the boots on the ground. This is for those surrounding nations, and Russia and Iran, where they have common interest of ours of taking down this illegitimate state, ISIS.
Joining us is Admiral Joe Sestak, running for Senate in Pennsylvania, also spent time in the Congress, 30 years in military intelligence. We now enter into what do we do with refugees? And the conversation is breaking out on the political spectrum about what the Obama administration plans to do with Syrian refugees. This is Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes.
We're still planning to take in Syrian refugees. We have very robust vetting procedures for those refugees. It involves our intelligence community, our National Counterterrorism Center, extensive interviews, vetting them against all the available information. And what we need to be able to do, frankly, is sort out that foreign fighter flow, those people who've gone into Syria and come out and want to launch attacks, or those people who've had connections with ISIL in Syria. We need to be able to have the intelligence base to identify and target those people. At the same time, we have to recognize they're tragic victims of this conflict. They're women and children, orphans of this war, and I think we need to do our part, along with our allies, to provide them a safe haven.
And, of course, opponents of that are saying that this is way too dangerous. This is Senator Marco Rubio, who's running for president.
Listen, the background checks are required now. The problem is not the background checks. The problem is we can't background check them. You can't pick up the phone and call Syria, and that's one of the reasons why I've said we won't be able to take more refugees. It's not that we don't want to, it's that we can't, because there's no way to background check someone that's coming from Syria. Who do you call and do a background check on them?
Joe, what's the reasonable and efficient reaction here?
Two images come to mind. One, yes, that terrorist that came in with refugees from Syria and did damage to Paris, but also of that young baby that was carried from the water out onto the beach. I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit. I worked in intelligence as it flowed to the President of the United States when I was on the White House staff as Director of Defense Policy. The United States of America has the ability to go through each person as they come in to ensure those that aren't safe are thrown out, and those that are permitted a humanitarian sanctuary for a moment of time in their transition. There's not a question in my mind that we can do the correct balance. We're America, and in my background, having watched it, we know who to not, that if we can't vet them, they don't come in. We can do this well.
Okay. Joe Sestak, always great to have you with us on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ed.
Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bring you this production. When we come back, a recap of Saturday night's debate, which was not interrupted because of the terrorist attack. The Democrats moved forward and had their debate on Saturday night in Des Moines, Iowa. And kudos, I think, to CBS News President Steve Kappas for saying this is exactly what presidents would have to deal with. Yes, we're going to do the debate. That's next.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania, to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The Ed Schultz Internet broadcast is brought to you by the Ring of Fire radio show. Listen to the Ring of Fire weekends on radio stations across the country. Get more information and the news of the day at ringoffireradio.com.
Thanks for the listen. Thanks for the video watch. WeGotIt.com, RawStory.com, and RingOfFireRadio.com. Saturday night in Des Moines, Iowa, Wall Street got a lot more attention in this debate than in the previous debate. And the conversation about what to do about income inequality and greed on Wall Street. Hillary Clinton says she has a comprehensive plan to change everything that's unfolded and to protect the American economy. She also says that her experience as a New York senator makes a lot of difference.
I did introduce legislation to rein in compensation. I looked at ways that the shareholders would have more control over what was going on in that arena, and specifically said to Wall Street that what they were doing in the mortgage market was bringing our country down. I've laid out a very aggressive plan to rein in Wall Street, not just the big banks. That's a part of the problem, and I am going right at them. I've got a comprehensive, tough plan. But I went further than that. We have to go after what's called the shadow banking industry, those hedge funds. Look at what happened in 2008. AIG, a big insurance company, Lehman Brothers, an investment bank, helped to bring our economy down. So I want to look at the whole problem, and that's why my proposal is much more comprehensive than anything else that's been put forth.
Senator Sanders, you've said that the donations to Secretary Clinton are compromising. So what do you think of her answer?
Not good enough.
And the senator from Vermont went on to say super PACs are not the answer.
I am the only candidate up here that doesn't have a super PAC. I'm not asking Wall Street or the billionaires for money. I will break up these banks, support community banks and credit unions. That's the future of banking in America. I have never heard a candidate, never, who has received huge amounts of money from oil, from coal, from Wall Street, from the military-industrial complex. Not one candidate said, oh, these campaign contributions will not influence me. I'm going to be independent. Well, why do they make millions of dollars of campaign contributions? They expect to get something. Everybody knows that. Once again, I am running a campaign differently than any other candidate. We are relying on small campaign donors, 750,000 of them, $30 a piece. That's who I'm indebted to.
And the bottom line here is that no one has a straight answer for Bernie Sanders when it comes to why do you take the super PAC money? Just because it's legal? In the Twitter world, Hillary Clinton caught a lot of flack for invoking 9/11 and connecting it to Wall Street.
I represented New York, and I represented New York on 9/11. When we were attacked, where were we attacked? We were attacked in downtown Manhattan, where Wall Street is. I did spend a whole lot of time and effort helping them rebuild. That was good for New York, it was good for the economy, and it was a way to rebuke the terrorists who had attacked our country. So, you know, it's fine for you to say what you're going to say, but I look very carefully at your proposal. Reinstating Glass-Steagall is a part of what very well could help, but it is nowhere near enough. My proposal is tougher, more effective, and more comprehensive because I go after all of Wall Street, not just the big bank.
Well, the question is, are you going to advocate with all of these senators, Mrs. Clinton, that are supporting you in the Senate to make sure that they follow your lead and reinstate Glass-Steagall? She claims her proposal goes further. I want to hear all these endorsed senators speak up about how they're right with Hillary Clinton on fixing Wall Street and doing something about it. Because quite frankly, I just don't hear them. This is Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bring you this production. We're back tomorrow.